Docker used to be a differentiator, but nowadays it's on every single resume, and some engineers quietly moved on to something else. They have stopped chasing tools and started building real systems at home, on cheap hardware, in their free time. They run it in their closet, they break it on weekends. This allows them to walk into interviews with stories that nobody else has. And what they're doing isn't complicated. It's built in 3 layers, and most people never get past the first. And the first part is understanding that Docker alone is no longer enough. You see, imagine you're working with infrastructure and you're using Docker and you're creating a couple of images, or for example, you're creating a couple of containers with pre-created images. What is going to happen? You're going to run into an interview and they're going to ask you, well, what kind of work have you ever done with infrastructure? I mean, I remember when I was applying for my first working student position, they were asking me if I have experience with deploying a couple of things, even though it was a thing about coding. And if you've only created a couple of containers with pre-created images, then you didn't really solve any magnificent problem. And in that interview, it's going to show when they're going to ask you about all of your different experiences and what kind of problems you ever ran into. Imagine your solution would be, I ran into a problem and then I used 2 commands and that's it, and everyone's using those commands. Is it really a problem that you can talk about? No, probably not. So you need to find a way to create these kind of problems, and you have to create them in a special way that is going to apply to not industry standards, but maybe you're using technology that the industry is already using. The problem is not that Docker is bad software, the problem is that everyone is using Docker. And it's really difficult to even find applications that don't have Docker images. So just talking about like, oh yeah, I created a Docker container is no longer going to cut it. You have to find a way to create infrastructure problems, and you don't have to be the absolute expert, or you don't need certifications in infrastructure if you don't want to. What you need is you need to have some kind of fundamental experience with how it actually applies in the real world. Now you have to ask yourself, how does the industry use containers, right? They're not going to manually deploy a couple of containers and call it a day. You're not working with 10 or 20 different containers in the real world. You're working with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of different containers. So you need to find a way to manage those containers. How can you manage those? Well, you use Kubernetes. And this is especially important because the entire industry is shifting towards Kubernetes. You need to find a way to create Kubernetes experience. And as I said before, you don't need massive amounts of Kubernetes experience. You don't need to be a Kubernetes god with all of the certifications that exist in the entire world. But the fact alone that you can go into an interview and talk about, yeah, I'm maybe not working with Kubernetes on a daily basis, but maybe you're working on a weekly basis with Kubernetes and you solved a couple of problems with Kubernetes. I mean, think about that. Think about all the stories you can talk about. You can tell them what kind of problem you solved, how you analyzed it, and in what kind of way you solved it. That is going to make you stand out. And the great thing about using Kubernetes is it allows you to create a real system about how you manage those containers. So all of these different applications, they might have created real images, Docker images for you that you can use and then create containers out of it. But what they didn't create is that system. How do you create a system that is going to work when you have multiple different nodes with containers? And you have to make sure that the traffic somehow arrives on those containers. The problem with Kubernetes is there are so many different things that you have to master to truly create a system that is going to work for your specific situation. Because Kubernetes allows so many different options, you can completely build Kubernetes in a kind of way that you want to use it for. And this might sound like a negative thing, right? I mean, if you have many options, it's going to create a configuration hell for you. And you're right, that is creating a lot of problems. But problems per se are not a bad thing, they're actually a good thing. Think about this from a perspective of an interviewer. When he's going to ask you, and like, do you have any Kubernetes experience? And you're like, yeah, I solved that problem and I analyzed that and I found this specific solution and that led me to another problem. And they're realizing, wait a second, we also had to face these kind of issues as before. Now, obviously, they were able to solve them. It shows that you have this exposure regularly to Kubernetes and that you could work with Kubernetes. I mean, think about the following. You want to deploy a database onto Kubernetes. So you have one instance on one node. Now what is going to happen? Maybe you have so much traffic you need to have a second database instance. So you simply create a second one, right? But wait a second, there's a problem here. When we create that volume on a different node, it no longer has the same data as the first container. So we somehow have to find a way to make sure that this data is synchronous between the different nodes. But then also what happens if one node is going to write something and the other thing is also going to write something, and those things are trying to sync up, but they're going to overwrite themselves. These are the kind of problems that you're going to face when you use Kubernetes. And massive companies like Google or Netflix, for example, or even the smallest companies already solve these kind of issues. You have the option to talk about the kind of things that you were able to solve, that you were analyzed, and you can list out, yeah, I had these 7 different options and I picked that specific one for this specific reason. And they're going to realize, whoa, this guy is actually working with it. Every single problem you solve gives you the opportunity to talk about it, to create a story around it, or to at the very least have a real story how you experienced that. But you need a playground that you can play around with, and you can to find these different problems that you will eventually have with Kubernetes. And one of the hardest parts with learning infrastructure is, at least that was the case for me, is you have to find a place to really understand and learn these kind of problems that other people, so many other people that they're like experts in the field, already solved. And without those real problems, you will have skills that are hard to prove. Like you can talk about, yeah, by the way, I have Kubernetes experience. But once you're at the point where you are regularly finding problems by creating them inside of this one playground that you have to build for yourself, then you're able to talk about these problems, how you analyzed those specific problems, how you solved them, and what different options you had to solve that problem. And then you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I picked that specific one because the other things didn't really work in my specific case for some reason. So we have to find a way to create this playground for yourself. And this is where it makes a lot of sense to have a Kubernetes Home Lab. Now, you might be wondering, what is a Kubernetes Home Lab? A Kubernetes Home Lab is, for example, old hardware that you're using, and you're going to install Kubernetes software directly onto that node. And by the way, if you don't have old hardware laying around, you can use a virtual machine. You can even use Docker containers to spin up a Kubernetes cluster. That all works fine. The only thing you need is you need a place where you have Kubernetes running, where you can play around with Kubernetes and you can be like, maybe I want to have an alternative to Google Photos. And you want to have it, for example, a privacy-focused one. Enter, for example, which is the German word for duck. So Enter.io is one of the best privacy-first focused applications as an alternative for Google Photos. And then you're like, okay, I want to deploy it there. But how do I do that, right? And then you have, for example, a Docker container that you have to recreate on Kubernetes, which is fairly simple, to be honest. But then you also run into this problem of like, wait a second, I need a database. Do you see? It's the same problem that we already faced earlier. But then there's also another thing. You also need object storage. And you'd be like, okay, what is object storage? And that is a problem for another time and something I'm absolutely going to talk about. But at the same time, you have to also figure that out, right? And let's say you have 3 different nodes. And maybe what could happen if you have all of your files on this one node, but that node goes down? Then you have to also mirror it to the other nodes. How do you do that? These are the kind of problems that big companies have to face regularly. And you're able to face them at home whenever you want to work with it. Or maybe you're like, oh, I want to create a web server, right? And you have a web server running. And then you're like, oh, I want to make sure that other people can access it. But I, at the same time, don't want to expose a port on my router. So what do? These are the kind of problems that you will have to face through and you will have to talk about and you will have to think through. This makes a home lab such an important part of your arsenal to really understand infrastructure. Even if you're a software developer, it doesn't matter. I mean, think about it. I started out as a software developer. And I was also asked, do you have experience with Docker? Do you have experience with Kubernetes? Well, at the time, I didn't have experience with Kubernetes, right? But who cares? Nowadays, I would learn that because learning Kubernetes was so much fun. Yes, some of these problems are quite annoying, but it really, really helps to understand. It really helps to understand what happens if you open youtube.com or tiktok.com or Google, or what happens if you post an image on Instagram. What happens behind the scenes? How do they store these different images? Where do they store them? What happens if a data center goes down? I mean, think about it. You somehow have to connect those different computers that are inside a data center. And they all have to work together towards one goal. How do you do that? And these are the kind of things that you have to think through that will strongly influence how you will create code and how you will see how to create those applications in the future. So even as a software developer, it's super important. Now, the truth is, Docker is already everywhere. We already know it. Containerization is everywhere, and that's a good thing. Microservices, containerization, that's a good thing, and we want to push forward towards that. But just learning Docker is not enough anymore. Imagine you would have to think through, I have millions of containers. What do I do with them? What if one server goes down and you have to restart all of those containers manually? Is that really something that you would want to go through every single day, maybe at 3 a.m.? Probably not. So you have to go one step further and think, what would be the kind of tool that the industry is using right now to solve that specific problem? And that is Kubernetes. And my biggest recommendation for every single person out there is to learn Docker, learn Kubernetes, and you will have such an amazing experience. No matter if you're a software developer or if you want to go into infrastructure, it doesn't matter. Both of these tools are going to have such a profound impact on your future. And I'm going to see you in the next video. Until then, take care.